Example 1 says find two positive and negative angles that are coterminal with negative 30 degrees. Now, before we even go into answering this question, I want you to think about and identify which quadrant is negative 30 degrees in if we were to graph that. So pause the video and take a moment to think about it. I'm going to go ahead and start graphing it now. So here's my y-axis, here's my x-axis. My initial side, because we're graphing it in standard form, will be on the positive part of the x-axis. And then we know that the negative part of the angle tells us that we are going to be traveling in a clockwise direction. So we want to travel 30 degrees. Now remember, a quarter of the way is 90 degrees. So if I graphed this right here, and I graphed this angle, this would be negative 90 degrees. However, I'm traveling negative 30 degrees, and how are 30 and 90 related? Well, 30 is 1/3 of 90, so I want to break this up into thirds and then travel 1/3 of the way. So I've broken this up into thirds to the best of my abilities, so I'm going to go ahead and erase this part, and the negative 30 degrees would be right here. And so if you said that negative 30 degrees is in quadrant 4, you were correct. If you did not say quadrant 4, take a minute to reflect on why you got that incorrect. So now we have that placed there, and the secret to coterminal angles is basically just traveling a full rotation, either in the positive direction or in the negative direction. So if I'm starting off with negative 30 degrees, in order to go in the positive direction, I would add a full rotation, which again is 360 degrees. So if I added those together, that would be 330 degrees. And I can take that and I can add another full rotation to that, and that would give me another positive coterminal angle. So if I added those, that would be 690 degrees. So here are the two positive coterminal angles with negative 30. And we can also subtract off 360 degrees, which would give us negative 390 degrees. And then I can subtract off another 360 degrees from that, and that would give me negative 750 degrees. So here are the two negative coterminal angles for negative 30 degrees. Example 2 says, what quadrant do the angles 230 degrees, negative 580 degrees, and 1,380 degrees lie in? So we want to find each of those. I'm going to sketch my XY plane. Now, remember the straight angle. So if I started here and then I graphed this part, this would be 180 degrees. And then if I placed this here, then if I started there and ended there, that amount of rotation would be 270 degrees. And note that 230 is between 180 and 270. So that means that I ended up erasing too much. So let me quickly redraw this. So again, 230 is between 180 and 270. And so that means that if we were to graph that, 230 degrees would be 50 degrees past 180. So that would look something like that. So that would be 230 degrees, and that would mean that this is in quadrant 3. All right, so let's go ahead and graph the next one to help us figure out negative 580. So there's my y-axis, there's my x-axis. Okay, so I think it would be helpful for us to think of this in terms of coterminal angles, because if I took negative 580 degrees and I added 360 degrees to it, that would be a more like digestible number. All right, so that ends up being negative 220 degrees. So I'm going to travel in the clockwise direction. If I travel up to that point, that would be negative 90 degrees. If I travel up to that point, that would be negative 180 degrees. And then if I travel up to this point, that would be negative 270. And so that at that stage, I would have traveled too far. And so let me go ahead and erase that. So negative 220 degrees is 40 degrees past 180, so it looks something like that. And then we could say that this is negative 220 degrees, and that takes this to be, instead of writing out quadrant, I'm just going to put Q2. Okay, last one, we have 1380 degrees. I'm going to work with coterminal angles again. So 1380 degrees, if I subtract off a rotation, that's going to give me 1020 degrees, and then I'm going to subtract off 360 again. And if I do that, that gives me 660 degrees. And then if I do it again, that gives me 300 degrees. Now remember, one full rotation is 360 degrees, so I've gotten to the stage where I'm at 300. I could, if smaller numbers are easier for you to work with, in theory, I could take 300 degrees and subtract off 360 degrees. That's just going to give me a negative number, but all of these are coterminal, so that's fine. So that if I wanted, I could also work with negative 60 degrees. So here is my y-axis and here's my x-axis. Since it's negative, I'll be traveling clockwise. Here is my initial side, and negative 60 is going to be about maybe a little bit more than that. So this angle here would be negative 60 degrees, and so the terminal side is in quadrant 4. So for this one, I'm going to put quadrant 4, and I'll just go ahead and box all of my answers really quickly. So that is how you would do number 2.